The June 2018 National Rifle League 22 match, this week on Mail Call Mondays. Mail Call Mondays is brought to you by Modular Driven Technologies. If you need a chassis system for your precision rifle, check out mdttac.com. I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is Mail Call Mondays, the show that answers your questions about precision rifles, optics, and equipment. Welcome to another Mail Call Mondays, and this Monday we are going to talk about the June National Rifle League 22 match. Our local club at the Westside Sportsman's Club here in Evansville, Indiana, held the match this weekend. So I'm going to give you the rundown of the course of fire and talk to you about the rifle that I shot in open class in the NRL match, and talk to you a little bit about how well it did and some things that I can do to improve as always. First of all, let's talk about the NRL 22 experience in whole. You guys have heard me preach on and on about this. It is a really great way to get into rifle competition, precision rifle competition specifically, because a lot of the things that you do in NRL 22 really do translate over into centerfire precision rifle competition. Although you can get into NRL 22 competition at a much lower price point, because it is limited to 100 yards, there are a lot more local ranges that you can actually run an NRL 22 match on. And the NRL 22 format really makes it easy on match directors because you get a pre-packaged course of fire that utilizes a limited number of targets and a limited number of props every month. So really the hard work is already done. You just have to go out and you have to set it up and run it. So for those of you guys that are on a really tight timeline, have a smaller club, smaller area to work with, NRL 22 is a really great option. Now let's talk about specifically the 2018 season, because the June match is the first match of the 2018 NRL 22 competition season. There are some changes in the rule book, and I haven't gone through and read the rules in detail, but I'm just going to hit the highlights real quick that they put out with the June course of fire. The first one is the target package has expanded. So you may see more targets, you may see a few extra targets, more than what you were used to in the 2017 course of fire. It's still a marginal increase, so you're not going to go out and have to lay down $1,000 for a new target package. It is just an add-on to last year's target package, and JC Steel Targets is the official provider for the National Rifle League, so you can just go to their website and purchase the add-on target package. I also believe that the add-on package is on the NRL 22 website, but I have not checked on that today. The next thing is 3 more barricades have been added. Initially, barricades were limited to folding chairs and a ladder. That way it's stuff that's easy to transport, quick to set up, and doesn't take a lot of space in storage. Well, there's only so many things you can do with a folding chair and a ladder, and at some point that starts to get kind of old. Competitors get really used to those props, and so it's important to change it up. This year, they are adding a tank trap, a 55-gallon plastic drum, and a sawhorse with a shelf. So a tank trap, for those of you guys that don't know, it looks like an old school jack. It's basically a cross made by 4x4s with another board going through the apex, another 4x4 going through the apex. So it kind of makes a star pattern kind of deal. And when you sit it down, the base of it sits kind of as a tripod, and you picture another tripod coming up off the top. And a tank trap gives you a whole lot of options as far as how to shoot, positions to use, all kinds of things. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this is used in the course of fire going forward. A tank trap was one of those things that was really requested by shooters because you do encounter them very often in centerfire precision rifle matches. So having them in the rimfire matches, again, gives you another training opportunity to find stable ways to shoot off the tank trap going into centerfire competition. The 55-gallon plastic drum, that is a staple of all shooting competitions, be it handgun, 3-gun, precision rifle, etc. So it just makes sense that they roll it into NRL 22 matches. We end up seeing plastic drums at almost every precision rifle match I go to. Depending upon how you orient that drum to the target line, can increase or decrease the difficulty of engaging off the drum significantly. So it's really interesting to see how those drums can be placed around. When they're empty, they're relatively lightweight, so they're easy to move around. Most ranges will just leave them off to the side of the range, so storage is not really an issue. A 55-gallon plastic drum doesn't really degrade after years in the sun and the elements. The only time that we really have problems with 55-gallon drums is when uneducated shooters take them off to the side and staple targets to them and then shoot through them. That wears the drums out pretty quickly and causes problems when you go try to shoot on them later. So if you are a relatively new shooter and you see 55-gallon drums out at the range, don't go staple targets to them unless your range has specifically designated them for that purpose. And then lastly, the sawhorse with the shelf. Obviously, just think through your mind. There are tons of different ways that you can set up a sawhorse as a prop to shoot off of. You can make people sit on it. You can shoot across it. You can shoot down it lengthwise. You put a shelf underneath it. You now have a second or even third level, if you count prone on the ground, that you can shoot off of. So it gives you a whole ton of options. So I'm glad they are adding those for match directors that have to transport their props to and from the range every time they go to set up. Yeah, that may be a little bit of a pain in the butt if they introduce several of these into a single course of fire. But if you're still only using one or two during each course of fire, you're good to go. Tank traps, there are tons of plans out there for tank traps. You can build ones that are either permanently assembled and left on the range, or you can build ones that break down very quickly. We have a pretty large one for our centerfire precision rifle club that actually breaks down fairly easily. One of the members made a really interesting bracket type assembly that holds everything together. So you just pull two threaded pins out and the whole thing breaks down. So there are a ton of different designs out there that will make them easy to break down, and you could still store them on a roof rack or throw them in the back of a pickup truck and not have a problem. One of the next rule changes is base class rule change for a hard $350 for a specific model of rifle, also allowing mods to the barrel channel embedding. This is something that I was kind of looking forward to and hoping that they would do going forward into this season. Previously, the rules were that if a specific rifle was called out for inclusion in the base class, then all models of that rifle were allowed. So for instance, we'll use the Ruger 1022 as an example. Although the base class had a $350 price limit, the Ruger 1022 carbine fell under that price limit. So you could buy the Ruger 1022 carbine. The Ruger 1022 heavy barrel target model was significantly above the $300 price limit, but since the carbine was allowed, the target model was allowed. And this allowed for a lot of gaming. There are quite a few other rifles that have that similar situation. The Savage Mark II is similar to that. There are models that are in the base class, and there are models that are in the above base class price cutoff, but they were all allowed because there was a specific model called out that fell under that. The problem that I saw with this, and I mentioned it last year on one of our Mail Call Mondays episodes, was that replacing the stock, even if you're replacing it with another one that is available in that class line, bumped you out of base class into open class. So for instance, if you bought a carbine, a 1022 carbine, and then you put one of the different orientation stocks, one of the target model stocks on that 1022 carbine, that would bump you out of base class, even though you could go buy a 1022 target model with that stock and shoot in base class. So I'm glad to see that that's gone away. There is a hard limit, so if you want to shoot in base class, you have to get a rifle that is $350 or less. And the whole goal here is to make base class a place where guys can come in and they can try it out, hopefully with a rifle that they already have, and not have to spend $1,000+ to be able to actually get in and not get their butt whooped. So it's really important that base class remain a class that is fairly limited. Now, open class, I shoot in open class because I like gear. I like to play with higher end stuff. I like higher quality stuff. So you have to pay to play for open class. But I think it's really important that we do keep those two classes separate. I don't want the kid that is working every little bit he can outside of school to save up for a rifle and an optic to be discouraged because he's shooting in base class against the guy that's running a $2,000 rifle that happened to find a loophole in the rules. So that's really a good thing, I think, going forward. I really want to hear what you guys have to say on that rule change, though. Do you think it's a good thing that it's a $350 hard limit and we get rid of all the model issues? Leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. The next, this is kind of a minor one, but I think is an important one. Young Guns age limit is reduced from 18 to 16. This, I think, is kind of important. I have a 16-year-old son right now who is full adult size. He is actually heavier and taller than I am. So when we start to get into that 16 to 18 limit, 17 and 18 are full-grown men, and they're competing against, 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, who still may need some help moving the guns around on the barricades and that. So I think it is important to bring that age limit down. I actually wouldn't really be disheartened if they brought it down even further down into that 12 and 13 age limit. But I think 16 is moving in the right direction. I don't think at 17 or 18 you should be shooting in a young guns class. I think at that point you're shooting with the adults. And a new score also, or a new rule also says the best 3 scores per local club determines who qualifies for nationals from that club. The regionals have been eliminated. Apparently there were some participation issues with regionals, so regionals are gone. You shoot at your local club level, and how you finish in your local club level season will decide if you qualify to go shoot nationals. That also is a great thing for guys like me that I'm really limited on time and limited on travel. So now I know if I qualify for nationals, all I have to do is worry about slotting nationals in my vacation time limit, and I don't have to worry about regionals or where they're held or any of that stuff. So I think that makes just accessibility a little bit easier for people with really busy schedules. And lastly, the national championships will be in Las Vegas, May 17th through 19th. It's nice that they're putting out really ahead of time when these are going to be. That will allow me, as soon as I can bid for vacation, to drop that into my vacation and make sure that I can make the nationals. At this point, again, it's really early to say, but currently I think I'm going to plan on trying to make nationals, regardless of if I qualify to shoot in the nationals or not, just to be out there and to cover it and to associate with you guys. I really love the way NRL 22 is going, so I really would like to go out to nationals and, if nothing else, just cover them and let you guys know how the nationals are run and how they go. Since this will be the second year for it, I think there will be some bugs worked out and it will probably run a whole lot smoother. And these rules will go into effect now, but the barricades will not be required until the July course of fire. So that gives match directors a little bit of time to get everything together. So that is the skinny on some of the major rule changes. Now let's get on to the actual course of fire for the June match. NRL courses of fire are 10-round stages, and they run usually 5 courses of fire for our local club. Now there was some discussion last year about local clubs being able to add courses of fire, but these are the 5 scored courses of fire that go towards your national ranking. So we will go through these in order, and we pretty much shot them in order that the course of fire was published in. That's not necessarily required. Depending upon how your range is set up, it may be easier to move the flow in a little bit different orientation, but we ran them this year straight on through. And the first course of fire is called Lowe's Funky Chicken. And again, those of you guys that paid attention last year, you'll notice they really go through some creativity to come up with some stage names on these. This one is a 25-yard stage utilizing the Know Your Limits rack. So the targets were 1 inch, 3/4 of an inch, 1/2 an inch, and 1/4 inch. So you had 4 targets on the swing set. And upon the start signal, first of all, start position is rifle resting on the seat portion of a folding chair with the magazine in and action open. Now, upon the start signal, the shooter will engage the 25-yard 1-inch target with 1 round. If hit, the shooter will move to engage the 0.75-inch target with 1 round. If hit, the shooter will move on to engage the 1/2-inch target with 1 round. If hit, the shooter will move on to engage the 1/4-inch target with 1 round. If hit, the shooter may re-engage the 25-inch target. It says the 25-inch, I believe that was supposed to be 0.25, the 0.25-inch target until all 10 rounds are fired. At any time, the shooter may bank or protect their earned points by standing up, squeezing a rubber chicken, and doing a quick chicken dance. After points are banked, the shooter must restart at the largest target. If at any time the shooter misses, they lose all unbanked points and must return to the 1-inch target. So, rubber chicken and dance aside, there was a little bit of strategy to this course of fire, and I did use some strategy on it. I got down on the fire line. My time started. First of all, we're 120 seconds. All of the stages for this month were 120 seconds, 2 minutes for 10 rounds. So you've got pretty much an eternity. There was only one situation where I timed out on this month. But you've got plenty of time to get your shots off. The trick was to know where you are weak, to know your equipment, and know when that risk level starts getting higher and higher, because at any point you could shoot and hit the first 1-inch target and then bank those points. The points were 4 points for a hit on the 1-inch target, 8 points for a hit on the 3/4-inch target, 12 points for a hit on the 1/2-inch target, and 16 points for a hit on the 1/4-inch target. The total possible was 132 on this. So it's really, really important that you use some strategy and you bank your points, because as soon as you miss, you zero out if you haven't banked any points. So as I went through, I ran the rack the first time all the way through. I hit the smallest target and then I banked at that point. And the only reason I did that was because of the rifle system I was shooting. And I was shooting the Voodoo V22 for this. And this is an incredibly, incredibly accurate rifle. And we'll talk a little bit more about the rifle itself and my experience with it here at the end after we go through the course of fire. But this rifle was capable of very easily engaging that 1/4-inch target at 25 yards. So I went ahead, shot that, and then I banked my points and went through because I wanted to at least get that 16. The only way to get that 1/4-inch target is shoot it before you bank. If you bank, you have to go back to the largest and then run the rack again. So I banked it, went back up, ran the rack again, came back down, hit the smallest, and I think that was it for me. I didn't have enough time didn't have enough shots left to go through and bank it again. I had, I believe, one miss. I believe I had one miss on this, and that was right at the beginning, I believe. So the strategy though was to know where you're likely to miss and bank before you get to that point. So if you know your rifle is not quite a 1 MOA rifle, then, or that you weren't quite a 1 MOA shooter off of this chair because there was some instability. If you're watching that wobble area in that reticle and it's pretty large, maybe a good idea to go ahead, put the rifle on safe, jump up, bank your points, and then drop back down. And take your shots and go through. There were some guys that risked it, and there were a lot of zeros on this stage because they go all the way through and they go for that last little target and they just miss it, and then you're zeroed out and you have to start over again. Now, if you are absolutely positive that you can hit that small target 10 out of 10, then the strategy is simple. You run the rack until you get to the little one, and then you just ding the little one for your last remaining shots, and you max out on your points on it. So I did lose some points by shooting the small one and then banking and then going back and having to run the rack again instead of just staying on the small one. But it worked out for me because I think I had the highest number of points on that stage. So it's, again, strategy, knowing what you're capable of doing. Now, we didn't have a rubber chicken, so we did have to stand up and do a stupid little dance and pretend to honk a chicken or some nonsense like that. But the main point of it is you needed to break your position and stand up because then that required time to get back down and build your position again. So you couldn't go shoot and bank every time, nor would you really want to, because if you shot and banked every time, all you would do was get that 4 points on the large target every time. You couldn't restart where you left off. So strategy is a important thing. The next stage was I prefer the ladder. And as the title would indicate, this is a ladder barricade stage. Targets were at 50 and 100 yards. The 50-yard target was a 2-inch target, and the 100-yard target was a 5-inch target. There are 10 points for each hit for a total possible score of 100, and most of the time your total is going to be 100 points. The equipment on most of these stages is one bag that's approximately the size of a volleyball or smaller. For this course of fire, I ran with a short-action precision bag for the entire match. I didn't use my pump pillow at any point in time, so I just ran my small bag for both a front bag and a rear bag, depending upon what the situation required. In this instance, I ran the short-action precision bag underneath the fore end of the rifle, just in front of the magazine. I did that on the chair stage as well. The start position is rifle resting on the highest ladder step that the shooter can stand upright and get a sight picture, magazine in or loaded and action open. Shooter will begin with the rifle resting on the top ladder step and in position. Upon the start signal, the shooter will engage the 2-inch, 50-yard target with one round. Shooter will then engage the 100-yard, 5-inch target with one round. The shooter will then move to the next step down and engage both targets. The shooter will repeat this process until 10 rounds are fired. If the shooter reaches the bottom step and has rounds remaining, they will start going back up the steps. So this one doesn't really penalize you if you're short. If you have to start lower, then just once you hit the bottom, you have to go back up. The ladder stages are always interesting because they favor short guns. Really, the longer your barrel, the more you have to be able to pull out and go back in. And that's why I love suppressed guns. I had the ability to run a suppressor on this rifle, but I did not because in this instance, it makes it a longer overall package, and I really have to come back and break my position more to thread the rifle out and get it back through in the next one. So that is a consideration when you're setting up your gun. The ladder rungs are high enough that you generally don't have any problem with the sight height over bore. Even larger, like AR-style platforms, which, interestingly enough, I have yet to see at one of our matches. Those won't have any problems with the ladder. There are some other things like the chair where that high scope height may cause you problems. In this instance, I did have to turn the rifle sideways, thread it through, and then bring it back up to accommodate the bag and the scope through the back of the chair. Now, the trick on this is 50 yards and 100 yards. you really have to be careful with how you set the magnification and how you set the parallax on your scope, because there's not really enough time to switch your position, get a stable position again, shoot with dialing parallax and dialing elevation back and forth. So my strategy is I will usually set my parallax to where I can see both targets reasonably well through the scope. I will set my my turrets, my dope at 0, since this rifle's zeroed at 50 yards. It was a 50 and 100. So I will set it 0, and my holdover for 100 is 1.9. So with the 5-inch target, I can pretty much use the 2 hash mark in the razor and just hold on that 2 hash mark, and I'll be good to go. So that's how I set the rifle up, and then after that I don't have to mess with the rifle at all. I just have to worry about getting a stable position, and that was really key on this. Thankfully the ladder was nice and stable. We didn't have any wobble on the ladder, so you could load the ladder fairly well. But what I concentrated on this time, because this rifle is fairly well balanced about in this area, is I just concentrated on holding on to the rifle and applying pressure directly over the step, and then a slight rearward pressure, and that seemed to get me a really nice stable shooting position. I believe I dropped 2 shots on this. Really, and the one shot was because I broke it when I was a little bit unstable. The other shot, I was just worried about getting the shot off before I timed out, and I shanked the shot and I felt it go. So kind of irritating on my part that I could have at least picked up another one, but I didn't do too bad on it at all. One of the really big tips on this is, first of all, economy of motion. You want to, as soon as you break that second shot, you know, hit or miss, you have to move. So break the shot, apply your follow through, and then get out of position and get going. Don't worry about where the shot went to. If it was a clean shot, be moving when you hear the RO call out hit. Get into your next position, get everything stabilized, and go. Also, for those of you that aren't familiar with shooting barricades at different heights, you don't really want to bend your knees. When you start bending your knees, you are putting all of the pressure of supporting your body and supporting the rifle on the large muscles in your legs, and you will induce some quiver. Even the strongest guys, when you get into kind of a squat position and then try to hold it, will start to quiver pretty quickly. So really what I like to do is I will straighten my legs out and I will throw them in as wide a V, getting this nice triangle position as I can, and then that and the angle of my back at my waist will determine the height that I'm engaging the target at. And that works until I get down to the point where I need to drop to kneeling or drop to sitting below that. And given the option, I will usually run a kneeling on a stage like this, even if I have to really bend down to get that last spot. And the big reason behind this is kneeling is quicker to move from than sitting. If I go into a sitting position, I may be a little bit more stable, but it's also slower to get into and it's slower to get out of. I believe on this one, my last stage, that bottom rung, I ran that pretty much prone. It's almost a breaking your back prone, because the ladder is just high enough, and then with the bag underneath it, that I am really bending my back up. I'm really hyperextending my back. So if you have back problems, be careful of that. I'm fairly flexible with my back that way, so it's not that big of a deal for me. It's getting to the point, we were kind of joking that I may have to go start taking yoga classes to improve my shooting on some of these barricades and some of the ways that we have to get into position. The truly funny part is that's only half of a joke. I have actually considered starting to do some yoga to try to get some better stretching, some better flexibility for some of the shooting positions that we get into. So that was, I prefer the ladder. The next stage was Milliken's Memory Game, and this was a really interesting game. I'm not really sure that it was my favorite, but it was an interesting and creative way to engage targets with what we were given. The targets for this were at 50, 75, and 100 yards. The 50-yard target was a 1-inch target, 75 was a 1.5 inch, and 100 yards was a 2.5 inch. 10 points for each hit, total possible score of 90. So for this, you're only going to fire 9 shots, which normally the stages are 10 shots. This one was 9. The equipment was 1 bag, size of a volleyball or smaller, and the position is prone. So start position was rifle staged on the line with magazine in or loaded and the action open. Shooter will start at the table. So we're using a shooting bench next to the firing position as the table. Upon the start signal, the shooter will roll 3 dice. If a 1 or a 2 is rolled, the shooter will engage the 50-yard target. If a 3 or 4 is rolled, the shooter will engage the 75-yard target. If a 5 or 6 is rolled, the shooter will engage the 100-yard target. The shooter shall engage the targets from close to far. Once the dice designate the targets, the shooter will drop down and engage those 3 targets. Then the shooter will re-roll for the next 3 targets. Finally, the shooter shall re-roll for the final 3 targets. If at any time the shooter forgets the shooting order, they must get up and check the dice. So, 120 seconds time limit, but you did have to break position and move at least 3 times in that whole situation. Actually, 2 times. So, initial time and then 2 times after. So really interesting setup. So we have 3 dice. You would start at the table. Now, again, a little bit of strategy here. You could put your rifle in position, get your magazine in, bolt back. You could sight in on the targets. So make sure you can find each one of the targets in your scope. Get your bag, get your bipod set at the right height, get everything lined out on the gun. Because I actually screwed up on this one and did not insert my magazine. My magazine was still laying on the ground in front of the gun. Move over to the table, and then we roll the dice. Now, you have to be careful about your dice roll, because if you throw them off the table, it's extra time to have to go fish up the dice, set it there, look at what the numbers were on it. The way I did it, my memory is getting worse as I get older. So the way I did it was I rolled the dice and then I looked at the numbers. And let's say I had a 2, a 3, and a 6. Well, I would look at that and go 2 is close, 3 is middle, and the 6 is the end. So then I would forget the numbers and just go close, middle, end. If I rolled a 1 and 2 6s, then I would look at that and go close, far, far. And so I didn't have to remember what the numbers were. I just remembered the sequence in which I was going to engage the targets. And that worked a whole lot better than trying to remember numbers and then, while I'm on the scope, translate that. So as soon as I saw the numbers, I translated that into a firing order and then jumped on the gun and engaged the targets in that order. The movement was nice because you had to jump off, try not to disturb your rifle too much, roll the dice, get back on, again, trying not to disturb your rifle too much, get in, and then get your shots off. Fun game, a little bit of movement, a little bit of extra something, just not sitting there on the gun. And I actually cleaned this stage, so obviously I liked it. It was a fairly fun overall stage, and again, something a little bit different. Now, one note on our setup. The match directors kind of have the freedom of how they place the targets out. What our MD, Neil, does is for stuff like this where we are engaging a line of targets, he will usually run them down the right-hand side of the range that we shoot on, and it usually ends up right along the mowed grass line. So it gives you a definite terrain feature to follow when you're moving from one target to another, because a smaller target, once it gets beat up, can sometimes be really difficult to pick up on the grass or the terrain or anything behind you. And we don't go out and paint anything orange or put any target indicators out, so it's usually just a beat up gray target. One thing that I have brought up before that I'll bring up again is, match directors, be careful if you are periodically repainting your targets. It tends to be a little bit unfair if you go out and you paint all your targets and you have nice bright white targets for this first guy that goes out and runs it, and then the fourth guy has to shoot on beat up gray targets. It's slower to pick them up, it's slower to transition between, and it's a greater possibility it's going to hit the wrong targets. So if you're going to paint the targets, you really should paint the targets for every shooter or every other shooter so that they have nice bright clean targets to aim at. If you're not going to paint the targets for every shooter or every other shooter, then just don't paint the targets at all. Leave them beat up and gray. That way it's a level playing field for everybody. That's just my opinion on painting targets. I come from shooting Steel Challenge, where the targets are painted after every shooter. And then I go into shooting precision rifle, where target identification and target location is part of the game. So having to find the target and pick out the target against a cluttered background is part of the difficulty level of making the shot. So just something to think about. There's not really a right or wrong answer to it, but just try to make sure that difficulty level in locating the targets is the same for all of your shooters. And the next stage was a prone stage called You Got to Move It, Move It. You got to move it. Yes. This was a prone stage, and it did throw a little bit of movement into it. The targets were at 50 yards, and this was a paper stage, and usually I despise the paper stages. For some reason, I really have issues with paper stages. So the ranges and targets, 50-yard targets, and the target that you were shooting at was a 1.5-inch circle. The center of the circle was 10 points, the next scoring ring was 7 points, and the outer scoring ring was 5 points. I believe the center X ring for the target was approximately a quarter to half inch. I don't recall offhand. I didn't save any of the targets, but you can still go to the NRL website and actually print out the paper target if you want to shoot it on your own at home. The starting position was prone behind the rifle, magazine in or loaded, and action open. On the start signal, the shooter will engage the 1.5-inch 50-yard paper target with 2 rounds. Then the shooter will pick up his or her rifle and move it to the other side of the cinder block next to them and engage with the next 1.5-inch paper target with 2 rounds. Shooter will then pick up his or her rifle and move it back to the other side of the cinder block and engage the next 1.5-inch paper target with 2 rounds. The shooter will continue this until all 5 paper targets are engaged. So basically we set a shooting mat out, and there was a concrete block in the center at the front of the shooting mat. You started on whichever side of the shooting mat you wanted. On the start signal, you fired 2 shots into the top target. You then picked up your rifle, set it on the other side of the concrete block, reacquired the target, the next circle down, fired 2 shots into that circle, picked up your rifle, set it on the other side, and then the next target down, so on and so forth until you had fired 10 shots, and you ended up with 2 shots engaging each one of the 5 targets, or 5 circles on your target downrange. Again, the key thing here is, first of all, knowing which target is your target to engage, because the way that we run it is all of the targets are pasted up on one target board. We ran this in conjunction with the last stage. That way shooters could, if they were waiting for the other stage, they could come down and shoot the paper stage. If they just got done shooting that stage, then they could flip over and shoot the paper stage. The paper stage sometimes tends to be a bottleneck, but this time the way we shot it, it wasn't a bottleneck at all, because there wasn't really any movement. You just had to have somebody keeping track of the time to run shooters through, and we could run shooters 2 at a time is what we did this time. We could have run more, but 2 at a time seemed to work fairly well, since the other stage, the unsupported stage, we were only running 1 shooter at a time. So simple, straightforward, paper, a little bit of movement, 120 seconds, which was tons and tons and tons of time for this. I got all 10 shots off no problem with a bolt action rifle. And the interesting thing is, we noticed that almost all of our shooters had a little bit of elevation issues on the first couple of shots before they figured it out and then moved on from there. So I don't know what to attribute that to. This rifle, that dead on zeroed. When I was shooting off the mat, off the ground, I had half a mil of elevation adjustment for a 50-yard target. My shots were impacting about half a mil high. So the only thing I can think of is I was picking up mirage coming off the ground, and that may have been causing an issue, but that's something I'm going to have to take a look at a little bit later on. Believe the bullet. Now with this one, and I'll post a picture of what my target looked like, it was interesting for me because I shot the first one and I had an offset. I didn't really believe it at first. We are shooting rimfires. I was shooting Wolf Match Extra, but it still is possible to get flyers with 22s from a myriad of different issues, from the lubrication on them, the rim thickness, all kinds of stuff. So a flyer with 22 ammo is not uncommon. So I broke the shot, felt good, and it was high. And I kind of looked at it, didn't really believe it, broke the next shot. Next shot was high as well, so now I've thrown 2 out. So as soon as I did that, I measured the offset, came over, screwed up the offset somehow or another, fired my third shot, which was still high, measured off of that, got on to the next target, and then I was actually able to start putting them in the bullseye, going down the target, and came off of it with a decent number of points. But the 3 misses really hurt me. If I had actually got some scores off of those, then it would have been better. I think I took the second highest points for that paper stage, but if I had believed the bullet and had more confidence in the rifle a little bit earlier on, I would have come away with quite a few more points on that stage. There's no trick to this. Make sure that your rifle is set up, your bipod height and everything is good to go straight off the bat, and then it's just a matter of economy of motion of moving the rifle to the other side, sliding over, getting everything set up. The one thing that it didn't really hinder me a lot, but could have helped me out a little bit better, was the Voodoo does not have any rear sling mounting points, no rear flush cup, so there was no way for me to attach my rear bag to the buttstock. Anytime I have to move the rifle around and I'm running a rear bag, I like to have the rear bag actually attached to the rifle because it will stay right here where I need it to be, and it's easier for me to grab it and slide it underneath, or just grab a hold of the bag when I lift the rifle up and retain the rifle by the bag. So no problem there. I managed to make it work. Moving the rifle back and forth and reacquiring the target was not the problem. Actually getting on the target and engaging was. And I think I was on 15 power through most of this. This is the Vortex Razor Gen 2, and this one is the 3 to 18 power model. So I have plenty of magnification on this, very, very razor sharp glass, so no problem seeing through any mirage or any of that issue. And the parallax on the Razor does actually go down to 25 yards, so it is a fantastic optic for shooting this kind of competition, although a lot of people will argue a $2,000 optic for a rimfire competition may be a little bit of overkill, but it worked great, no complaints about it at all. And then our last stage is called Summer Squash, and this is a positional stage. The start position is starting in the standing position, magazine inner loaded and action open. Upon the start signal, the shooter will engage either the 3-inch or 6-inch target, which is at 75 yards, with 2 rounds from standing. Then the shooter will engage either target from kneeling with 2 rounds. Then the shooter will engage either target from sitting with 3 rounds. Finally, the shooter will engage either target from prone, unsupported, with 3 rounds. So, very simple. Start standing. If you had a sling, you used your sling, fired 2 rounds at either target, and I kind of realized that shooting this rig with a sling that wasn't quite appropriately sized for it, I had to readjust the sling on the fly. I was going to be a little bit unstable with it. So I went for the big target for the standing and the kneeling position, which worked out fairly well. When I dropped down into sitting, I was still not quite stable. I didn't want to spend a lot of time. So I believe I went for the smaller target on the sitting. And then I switched to prone. I went into the prone position, got locked in, fired a shot, managed to get a hit on the small target from prone, and then I timed out with 1 round remaining, which tells me I probably could have been a little bit more efficient moving from position to position. It was a 120-second time limit, but to be quite honest, I have not been training for positional shooting. That is something that I will be getting back into out at the range. NRL 22 is really the only point that puts a heavy emphasis on positional shooting, and I really do like that. I like it because I know I need it. I don't necessarily like it because I'm good at it, because I'm really not. It's something that takes quite a bit of practice, but thankfully for me, from my Marine Corps background, the Marine Corps KD course was all slung unsupported shooting. So you're just using a sling to support your rifle and your body to hold it. So I do have experience doing that. It's definitely a perishable skill, and it requires consistent practice to be able to maintain that. And overall, it was a fun match, and it definitely gives me some points going into this season that I need to train on. So when the score was all tallied up, I was actually really surprised to find out that I won the local match. I think it was probably a pretty close race between first and second. I don't remember the complete points total. I neglected to snap a picture of the score sheet before we left because I was actually kind of shocked to see that I won it. I'm kind of thankful that I did, because the level of equipment that I was shooting at this match gave me absolutely no excuses. I couldn't say, oh, the equipment was messed up. It wasn't. The Voodoo performed perfectly. This is an incredibly, incredibly accurate rifle. Now, I really didn't do my part going into this. As always, I was running short on time, so basically the morning of the match, I grabbed the rifle out of the shipping container that it came in. I threw a bipod on, and I used the Atlas Cal bipod from B&T Industries. Grabbed some Wolf Match Extra, threw it in the bag, and rolled out. I got there just a little bit. I thought I got there on time. Apparently, I got there a little bit late. They had set up earlier, and they were ready to go. They were texting me on my way out to the range. So I rolled in, feeling a little bit pressured because guys were waiting on me. Got on the gun, fired 4 shots to get my 0. 2 shots, the first 2 shots I ever fired out of the rifle went through the same hole at 25 yards. Made a sight adjustment, fired the next 2 shots again through the same hole at 25 yards. Now, it was a different hole because I did make a sight adjustment, but again, through the same hole. Moved over to 50 yards to verify my 50. The rifle actually ended up being zeroed for 50 yards, already right out of the box. I had to zero the windage just a little bit. I don't know if that had to do with taking a hit on the way out, or if it had to do with the ammunition, whatever. It wasn't a big deal with the razor. I just measure the distance of the offset, dial it, and I was good to go. I didn't really even have a chance to take a poke at 75 or 100 because, again, they were waiting on me. So I just said, all right, let's roll with it. And come to find out, the 0 that I was using, or the dope that I was using for my 1022 with Wolf Match Extra, is the exact same trajectory for this rifle with it, which was somewhat to be expected. The barrel lengths are about the same, so I didn't expect a massive difference once I got my 0. Went on, shot the match. The rifle performed absolutely flawlessly. I had 0 misfires, not a single dead round. The bolt cycled very, very smoothly. The bolt throw and the bolt movement on this and the lockdown is just absolutely slick as can be. The trigger's fairly light. We haven't thrown a gauge on it yet, but it's in that 2.5 to 3 pound range. I'm not sure what trigger they have in this. I still have to check on that before we do the full review. I don't want to break it out of the stock to look at the trigger until after we actually get it out and shoot some accuracy drills with it. Then I may pull it apart and show you some pictures of the inner workings and of the bedding job that they do in here and all that stuff. So We'll deal with that going forward. But I can tell you this, that this rifle just absolutely put a smile on my face. The accuracy was great on it. It really left nothing on the table for me, nothing for me to complain about. Earlier, last Mail Call Mondays, I mentioned the bolt throw. That still is a mixed bag. For a trainer, if you're truly using this as a trainer rifle, then you really want a longer bolt throw to simulate that centerfire rifle. If you're using this as an NRL 22 competition rifle, this short bolt throw will help you significantly. When you're in a position, say for instance on the ladder, being able to just flick that bolt back, forward, down, with just your fingers with very little movement of your firing hand, is a great help. It makes it very quick to run the bolt. And again, large oversized bolt handle like you see on most centerfire bolt action rifles now. Short, smooth bolt throw, and the trigger and the grip is exactly what I expect from a centerfire rifle with an A5 style stock. Now, we did mention this is a gray bow stock that they did cut for the adjustable cheek piece. And it feels just like a Macmillan A5, which is what it's designed to do. So it's a great option for a rifle like this if you're running a centerfire with a Macmillan A5 on it. So the rifle performed great. The optic, the Vortex razors are just absolutely spectacular optics. The turrets are locking. They have a really heavy lock and unlock. So if you need to dial very quickly, you want to make sure you leave them unlocked. But the clicks are very distinct. No problem whatsoever. Again, because they're locking and unlocking, the nice thing is if you have to make, for instance, a windage correction, you can make the windage correction, you can lock it back down, and you're done. This does have the EBR2 reticle in it, so we do have the Christmas tree coming off the bottom. So you could really leave this locked in and not do any zero adjustments. The positional stage was the only stage where I actually dialed the turret, and that's because when I'm shooting in a very unstable position, I like to have the center of the crosshairs as my aiming reference instead of trying to go off a hash mark. If I had to do multiple distances, then I would have left the turret on 0, and I would have held for each one of my aiming points. But that was the only stage that I did actually dial on. Everything else I pretty much just held, and it worked absolutely fantastically. So again, no complaints overall. The Cal bipod, the Atlas Cal, this is the first match that I have actually used the Cal in. And I still have mixed feelings on it. Maybe it's because I'm used to the Atlas PSR and the previous versions of Atlas. The legs work just the same, so no problems there. It's just this locking adjustment down here. I still tend to find that if you leave it loose enough that you can camp the rifle and dial out any inconsistencies in that ground level, there is a little bit of lash in the bipod, a little bit of side-to-side lash. If you tighten it down enough to get rid of that lash, then it's really difficult to level out the bipod. So it's kind of one of those mixed bags. If you want the ability to totally lock the bipod out, then this is definitely the bipod to go for. For those of you guys that really didn't like the panning feature of the PSR in the previous version Atlas bipods, I think this is going to be a great option. It's incredibly high quality, like all of B&T Industries products. We do have a KMW pod lock knob on here, so it's very easy to get it locked out, tighten it down, and then if it's sticking down in the way, you just pull the ratchet mechanism, dial it out of the way, and let it snap back in, and then you're clear down here. So really no problem at all on adjusting it. Legs adjust just like any other Atlas bipod. It does accept all the other feet and accessories that the previous Atlas do. It does have the nifty little rubber stopper on the front, so if you need to use it as a barricade stop, that option is there. That opportunity did not present itself at this match, but I look forward to utilizing that going forward and seeing how well it works. So again, overall, the system worked absolutely fine. I will make one comment on the magazines. Voodoo did send us 3 magazines out to utilize with this. They are an AICS pattern, which means that they will fit in an AICS style chassis. Obviously, there are 22 magazines, so they are not AICS magazines, but they do fit most AICS style chassis out there. And they do have two little ears on them. They're 10-round magazines, and it's very, very easy to pull the follower down and load the cartridges in it. So it's fairly quick to load them. I did end up having issues where the cartridges would tilt if I ran the follower down too far and dropped the cartridges in. But if I was a little bit conservative with how far down I pulled it and then just fed a cartridge one at a time on top, then it was pretty easy to load them. I ended up only using 1 magazine and loading it between each stage. Just to see how difficult it was, because these are fairly expensive magazines, so you don't want to have to go buy a ton of them. But if you really wanted to, you could buy 5 of them for NRL, load each magazine with 10 rounds, and then just grab a fresh magazine for each stage if that's what you wanted to do. That's kind of what I do with the 1022. I'll load 5 magazines going out the night before or the morning of. That way I don't have to worry about loading between stages. I just grab a fresh magazine and go to the next stage. So that is the general overview of the Voodoo V22. Equipment is not what makes the game, but I tell you what, the game is a whole lot more fun when your equipment runs 100% and you know you have equipment that is not holding you back. Now, with a $2,000 rifle, $2,000 optic, roughly, it's definitely a heavy investment, but I tell you what, the guys that shot this out there, I offered to let anybody shoot it, whoever wanted to shoot it, but I always prefaced it with, it may cost you some money. I think I sold at least 1 V22 barrel to action to a shooter who was going to drop it in and make it a duplicate of his centerfire rifle. But everybody that shot it came away with a huge smile on their face. I couldn't believe how smooth it was and how good the rifle felt overall. So if you get a chance to shoot one of these, regardless of if you're in the market for them or not, definitely take that chance, get out and shoot it, and see how it works out for you. The optic... makes me really, really want to upgrade the optic that's on my 1022 right now, because you get used to high-end glass on your centerfire rifles. When you drop down and you're not running high-end glass in a competition environment, it just really irritates you. So having an optic that you know you can absolutely depend upon, that it's going to adjust accurately, and it's going to be able to quickly dial that parallax in, see what you need to see, that is really gold. So don't be afraid to drop some coin on a rimfire optic if you're serious about competition. Now, that's not to mean that you have to have a $4,000 rifle to compete in NRL 22 Open Class. That is absolutely not necessary. But if you want to play at the top of the game, then it's nice to have good equipment that won't hold you back. That is it for our coverage of the June NRL 22 match. If you guys have any questions or comments over anything we've covered, please leave it in the comments section below or send it to us on Facebook or Twitter. If you like the video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. I want to send a shout out to our Patreon supporters. Thank you guys for supporting the videos and the things that we do. We really couldn't do it without you, since the current YouTube situation is getting very untenable as far as making revenue off of the channel so that we have money to keep our operating expenses at bay. If you guys want to find out more about Patreon and how you can support the content that you love, check out the link down below. And until next time, get out and shoot.